Today, we're going to start talking about the actual process that the United States uses when it's coming up with its outcomes, or the laws and the regulations and rules and everything that we're going to follow. And we need to start that by first kind of doing a little bit of a history lesson about where the United States started and why we needed to evolve into our present framework. To begin, the United States, if you guys remember, and I'm going to kind of give you more, let me be clear here, I'm going to kind of cover a whole bunch of early American history really fast, not because I don't think you guys have had it or anything like that, but just in case everybody starts out at different levels. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence by going over it again, right? I'm just trying to cover what we need to get through. So the very first thing is that, and let me change this because then I can see my next slide as well. So the very first thing to come up with the United States was the fact that we started as colonies, right? Several countries brought settlers over to the New World and formed these basically outcroppings of their countries. And the biggest one is going to be Great Britain. There was also Spain down in Florida and stuff like that. But the biggest one for our consideration is going to be Great Britain. Great Britain had a whole bunch of wars going on. They needed to fund that somehow. And their idea was that we've invested all of this money into the colonies. The colonies are doing pretty well. Let's go ahead and have them pay for some of these wars that we've gotten ourselves in the middle of. Now, the colonists didn't really like this all that much. Who would like to be taxed on something that they didn't really have a say in? And that's exactly kind of what precipitated the Revolutionary War. Along that timeline, in the same general, circles that everything else was matriculating in, you had this emerging philosophy that kind of, I would say, is a resurgence of the true democracies that we talked about, like in Greece. But you have this idea that people ought to have some say in the way that they're governed. We don't want to just have some sort of king sitting far across the ocean saying, you guys will do this now, you guys will do that now. This started with the various letters saying you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, and the king and parliament in Great Britain coming back with increasingly difficult things that the colonists would have to perform in order to stay in their good graces. We're not going to dive into all of those, but just know that the basic thing that Great Britain was doing is making life more difficult for the future Americans. Did they have a right to do this? Probably. Under the state of affairs that was set up, there wasn't a problem with what they were doing from a legal standpoint, but it sure did make people angry. So the colonies got together and they decided that they were going to stop being subjects of Great Britain. They did this with the Declaration of Independence. It's an interesting read. You should read it at some point if you haven't. And when they did that, what do you guys think happened? Do people usually like it when you're like, I'm not listening to you anymore? No. The Parliament and King of Great Britain thought of it like impetuous children. If AJ tells me something, my 7-year-old, if I'm telling him, hey, buddy, you need to put your shoes on, he says, I don't even care, I'm not listening to you. What do? I don't just say, well, okay, then. I'll go on with my life. No. Great Britain decided that wasn't something they were going to do. So they decided they'd punish the colonies for that. The colonies didn't like that. There's all kinds of historical things that came to pass, like the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party. Eventually, this breaks down into an actual war. We have the Revolutionary War. America somehow beats Great Britain, despite all odds. And what do we do now? Fantastic. We've won the war. How are we going to rule a country? Well, In the beginning, the colonists very much feared the things that they had just finished overthrowing. They didn't want to have strong centralized power. They didn't want to have people that could tax. They didn't want to have a central government authority that could raise an army. And so they create these Articles of Confederation. And they, long story short, don't work. We're going to talk through kind of where that leads us, and why they didn't work, and why we needed the Constitution in order to function as a country. So remember, when we have collective action, when we have people who want to work together, we are all not the same people. If there are any Star Trek fans, we're not the Borg, right? We don't have one mind that we share. What happens when a shared need exists, but the government cannot reliably collect resources or implement decisions? What do you think? I didn't mean to advance that to the next slide.
I think what happened is we started to not be a union. We started to be divided.
Yeah. If you have a need that the government should be able to provide, but the government can't provide it because it can't access the resources, people are going to take things into their own hands, right? How many people have seen things on your social media feeds about flock cameras? Shout out, yes, no. I can't see hands, remember. I can see yours. Yeah? What do you guys think about flock cameras? Pro, con?
Good question.
I will answer your question in a minute, but I want to get a reaction from the people that know what they are first, okay? How many people know what they are? Of the people who know what they are, what do you guys think? Good, bad, unknown? What do you say?
I think they're all right.
You think they're all right? Yeah, so there's mixed feelings on flock cameras. Flock cameras are cameras that cities can put up, and they basically are powered by artificial intelligence, and they can track you. This is a really good thing when we have things like a kidnapping that we need to find somebody in a hurry. They can also be really kind of dangerous things too, though. And one of the things that people are unaware of is that flock cameras have a lot more power than just being able to see things. How many people have a cell phone in their pocket or on the desk, or you're watching a YouTube video right now instead of listening to me? That's okay. I've done it too. All of our devices now have Bluetooth in them. That's what enables us to do cool things like connect AirPods to it or have a watch that talks to our phone. But that's constantly giving off a signal basically saying, here I am, I'm a phone, go ahead and connect to me. And that signal's unique. It has something called a MAC address. That MAC address is unique to your device. Two iPhones don't have the same MAC address. That's why when you put your AirPods in, they don't connect to your friend's phone, unless you've set it up that way. A lot of flock cameras have Bluetooth sniffers. And so what they're doing is they're constantly recording what Bluetooth devices are around them and where they're at. So imagine this scenario. You have your phone and you decide that you're going to go to Target. And at Target, you buy a couple of things, and then you go get in your car, and then you go to a friend's house. Maybe you have a drink. Maybe you're underage. The flock camera can know all of this about you. And what's kind of scary about it is the cameras aren't owned by the government. They're owned by a company called Flock. That's a private company that can kind of do whatever they want with your data. A lot of people are really concerned about this. A lot of people don't want a private company to be able to know everything about you. It's really interesting because older people tend to be like, I don't want anybody knowing anything about me. And younger people are like, I don't care as long as the service is good. So that's a question you should decide for yourself. But there's a lot of vigilantism coming out now with flock cameras. I see this all the time. It's people who are like, I'm going to cut down this flock camera. Or more likely on Instagram, I'm not saying I'm going to cut down a flock camera, but let me show you what's really good at cutting this steel or this aluminum pipe. The issue is here that if the government isn't going to act, they don't have the ability to act, people will tend to take things into their own hands. Is this good? Is this bad? I'm not going to really weigh in on that one way or the other as it relates to Flock. as a general note, it makes it more difficult for the government to maintain authority. If we have a social contract where everybody's going to do whatever they want, then it makes it more difficult for us to feel secure in our, life, liberty, and property than we would if the government actually has some control. All right, so we covered that stuff. That's why we're going to get into why we need the Articles of Confederation in a minute. Here's the learning objectives for today. I want you to be able to describe how the Articles of Confederation divided authority between Congress and the states, explain why funding, commerce, enforcement, and amendment rules caused recurring problems, and distinguish the Articles' achievements from the structural weaknesses. The biggest problem with the Articles of Confederation is that it had really weak national powers. It was a deliberate choice, right? We didn't want to have that strong thing, but this is why it failed. Independence had been won against a powerful central government, and the Articles are going to protect that state authority because concentrating authority looked dangerous to the colonists at that time. This isn't because the designers ignored power. It's just that everybody kind of had their own way of doing things. If as part of this class, I were to tell you that you need to eat dinner at 5 o'clock, and you need to work out at 6 o'clock, and you need to do bath time at 7 o'clock, and you need to be in bed for story time at 8 o'clock, and lights are out at 9 o'clock, how many people would like to live under Andrew's roof? No. You guys have your own schedules, and that's okay. Because what happens in my house with my 7, 4, and 1-year-old is going to be different than what happens in your house and or dorm room. We can come together and work under a collaborative system, and we don't have to run our governments the same if we look at it from that microcosm sort of thing of your houses. This doesn't really work, though. We're going to skip the history here. We kind of went over all of that. What the Articles did is create a league of friendship. Each state retained sovereignty, freedom, and independence. That would be like saying, even though you're in this class, you get to do whatever you want when you leave this class. Come back. There we go. Congress represented each state, or the states. Each state had one vote. We'll come back to why that's really important later on too. The Union handled defense, diplomacy, Western lands, and other shared matters. So the colonies got to control what happened in their territories. The Congress got to control pretty much everything else. And then finally, the design favored state autonomy and limited central authority. Congress could frequently make decisions, but often could not deliver. So Congress could, for example, declare war and make peace, conduct diplomacy, resolve some interstate disputes, and request money and troops, but Congress could not reliably tax individuals directly, regulate interstate or foreign commerce, enforce state compliance through a separate executive, or use a general national judiciary. In the law, we frequently talk about laws as having teeth. There could be a law, for example, that says you should be secure in your possessions from unreasonable searches and seizures. That's the Fourth Amendment. We'll talk later on about how there's all kinds of exceptions to it and stuff like that. But let me make sure this is still running. Perfect. The general purpose is that you get to be secure in that. What does that mean? If we say that you get to be secure in your persons and property and everything, but we don't give some sort of mechanism to enforce that, does it really even matter?
No.
Right. If Lincoln University says you have to have a parking pass, but they don't actually take the time to give out tickets, do you really need a parking pass? Quick note, they will start enforcement soon. I think an email already went out to that effect, so if you don't have one and you want to park on campus, get one. Similarly, with the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures, the government has basically said, or the courts have said that, all right, if the government violates that, you can't use the evidence you get at a trial. That evidence is suppressed. So if I go and beat a confession out of you to some murder, and that's the evidence I've got to link you to it, then I don't get to use that to try and get you convicted of murder. And this is the problem with the way the Articles of Confederation were set up. The thing didn't have any teeth. So Congress could raise money to pay for army to declare war, but if they can't tax, then how are they going to pay for that army? This system also did achieve some important results. This, again, was one of the first major democracies, or modern democracies. We had some in the past. This was one of the first modern democracies. So it had independence, diplomacy, it had a Western land policy, and interstate corporations were real accomplishments. But it had those significant limits. So you might think, not a problem, Andrew. Why don't we just change the way the system works? We do that all the time. If something isn't working in here, we take some time and we revise it and we say, all right, this is going to be the new policy moving forward. Real quick note, how many people were able to access the textbook or you were able to get into it? Perfect. Anybody having problems with it still? That's a perfect example of something wasn't working in that the textbook was being difficult. So we changed how we were presenting it, and now I hope everybody can get in. It's a little bit more difficult if the system is set up so it can't change. Remember, there's 13 colonies to begin with. Important national decisions require 9 votes. That's a lot. It's not 50%, it's a supermajority. Every state had 1 vote regardless of population. Why does that matter? We'll talk about that when we start talking about the Great Compromise. But if you have 10 people over here, I like thinking about this as the decision about where we're going to go to dinner. Where do you guys like to eat here in Jefferson City? If you tell me the cafeteria, I know you're a liar.
Taco Bell.
Taco Bell. Any other shout outs? Texas Roadhouse. What do you say up back there? You need to talk a little bit louder. You're really far away. Yeah, I'm sorry. Cane's. All right, so suppose we say we're going to go to Texas Roadhouse, Cane's, or Taco Bell. And we have like 9 people over here who say, I want to go to Texas Roadhouse. And we've got we have 8 people over here who say, I want to go to Texas Roadhouse. And we've got 6 people over here who say, I want to go to Cane's. Where should we go?
Texas Roadhouse.
Yeah, that's a simple thing. Like, we can all say the majority wins, but could you imagine if one person could completely derail your evening plans and say, no, I only want to go to McDonald's? That's the problem with when you have it set up in such a way that you have direct representation. If everybody gets 1 vote, it's really offensive to the people who are like, I've got all the people over here who want to go to Texas Roadhouse, and we've got people who want to go to Cane's. Why are we even thinking about McDonald's now? Why do we even have to talk about that? Well, because if everybody has 1 vote, everybody is equal, regardless of how many people that 1 vote actually represents. Amending the articles required approval by Congress and every state legislature. So not only then, if we want to do something like, all right, we're going to go to Cane's versus Texas Roadhouse or vice versa, do we have to get all the representatives to agree, all of them? Then we have to go and get everybody that those people represent to agree. And just like we do now, there's lots of times this division between what the people on the local level think is important and what the people on the national level think is important. If I live in a very rural area and my principal concern is the price of corn, I could care less about what's happening with the steel industry, except to the extent that it affects the price of corn. And so if Congress says we need to increase taxes by a little bit so that the American steel industry can function and it's going to have all these downstream effects, am I going to care as a guy that's interested in corn? Probably not. So if I need to agree to this amendment that would cause this change, it's going to be very difficult for that amendment to ever go through. All right, and then finally, a state could benefit from national action while resisting its share of the cost. All the states benefited from the militia, from the military, but did they really want to pay for it? Probably not. We're going to skip that because we are running out of time. Every incentive under the Articles of Confederation pointed towards freeloading. If the Congress doesn't have the ability to enforce the decisions they make, then as a state, what we want is for Congress to make all the promises in the world. We want them to say things, this is not an example from then, but we want them to say things like, we're going to create a national highway system, we want a great Navy, we want all the armed forces. And then when it comes time to pay for it, we don't really want to foot the bill. And because they can't enforce taxation or anything like that, we don't have to. So, commerce created another massive issue. States had their incentives, like to favor local merchants, tax or restrict neighboring trade, protect local revenue. But nationally, these had consequences like retaliation, fragmented markets, weak bargaining abroad. Could you imagine if you all decide to go on a vacation for your fall break, which is the week of Thanksgiving, to Chicago? And maybe you're working at a restaurant here in town and you're making some money, and you decide you're going to go and have a great time in Chicago. So you take your money and you go over to Chicago, and it's worthless. The money you have is no good in Chicago. You have traveled just a couple of hours by train. You can catch it down by the river. It's a 6-hour train trip. Well, it's an 8-hour train trip to Chicago if you want to go. Not very expensive if you book early. But because you've crossed the Missouri-Illinois border, you now need to exchange all your Missouri dollars for Illinois dollars. We're in the same country. Does this make sense to anybody? It didn't even make sense to Europe. They changed out most of their local currencies for the euro, the EU currency now. But this is what happened. The other thing is that if I'm doing business in Missouri, Missouri is going to do things to try and make my business more profitable because that helps Missouri than Illinois' business. We see things like this, and we'll talk later on when we get to like the Commerce Clause about how it was struck down. But we see things like states saying any out-of-state vehicle entering our state needs to pay a road tax.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
What if you're on a border between Missouri and Illinois, like you on the split line? Do you go with Illinois taxes or do you go with the Missouri taxes?
If you're on the border with Missouri and Illinois, so this gets into Fed tax. It's incredibly complex, but it's going to depend on several factors. For example, usually you're taxed on where you earn the money. So if you live in Missouri and work in Illinois, you'd pay Illinois income tax. But if you do jobs in Missouri, then you'd pay Missouri income tax. And if you do both, then you've got to file in both states. Lucky you. Taxes suck, guys. Good luck. So why does this come to a head? Well, all the states are kind of doing the things that help the states, but as a nation, We have all this debt. We have trade disputes, and we have unrest that expose the weaknesses of how the Articles of Confederation were implemented. When we had the Revolutionary War, we borrowed money from Spain, France. France came and helped some. We owed people a whole bunch. But who are you going to get that money from? Your contract, the person you owe money to, or owe money from, if you're France, for example, is the Continental Congress. It is the United States under the Articles of Confederation. And Maryland is like, your contract's not with us. We don't owe you anything. And so nobody's paying this debt. Congress doesn't have the money. Why is this a problem? Well, if you don't pay your debts, then people don't think that in the future you're going to pay your debts. If you have a credit card in here, good. You are building your credit score for when you want to buy a car, buy a house, something like that. If you don't, then people don't really have a record of you. They don't know whether or not you're a good investment of their funds. Similarly, if you have a credit card right now and you're just like, popping bottles and making it rain, you're going to have some issues when you go to do these other things later in life because people say, man, this guy isn't a good investment. He has not paid his debts. And the United States is facing the same problem. Who wants to be doing business with somebody that they can't count on to pay the bill? As a country, when we want to start emerging on the national scene, we want to start making trade deals with other countries and importing goods and exporting goods. Nobody really knows that we're good for it yet. So the shared problems, we had war debt in defense, trade disputes, interstate coordination problems, and no stable national finance. The design constraints are that the Articles of Confederation permitted financial requests, not direct taxation. There was no national commerce power. Everything was dependent on state cooperation, and there was no separate executive enforcement of laws. This one we didn't really talk about. Back then, everybody was kind of doing multiple jobs. Frequently, a congressman would also be like a farmer or a business owner, and they wouldn't stay, I think in Virginia at that point, they wouldn't stay in the Continental Congress all year round. What they would do is they'd come, they'd have a session, they'd pass some laws, and they'd go home. When they went home, who was going to make things happen? Nobody, that's who. There was not like a president or the bureaucracy that we have here. If they said something like, hey, we're going to establish the United States Patent Office, there was nobody there to run it once Congress left. So they would make decisions, but then it was pretty much just a hope and a prayer that everybody would follow those decisions. All right, so I'm not going to do the activity again because we've got like 10 minutes left. Well, 15, but let me see how many slides I've got left. Okay, we will do this activity really quick. So we've talked about several different design problems that exist. I want you guys to pick one. Which one is most interesting to you? And what we're going to ask next is how we can fix it, basically.
The most interesting to me is, like, I guess when you talk about how we didn't have where we was one, like we were divided into countries, and that's kind of interesting that.
So kind of having each state has its own commerce system.
Yeah.
Does everybody else want to work that one up? Any other suggestions? Hearing none, somebody else, what's the problem with that? So the problem we have is that every state is its own commercial system. What's the structural problem with that? How do we fix it? I'll give you a hint. I told you guys earlier, but I'm going to have somebody else answer this one, all right? Thanks for contributing, though. That's just because I want to spread the love. If you guys don't shout things out, what I'm going to do is bring business note cards, and then we'll just start calling on people. It makes action impossible, yeah. How would you fix it, though? What would you do to change this so that we didn't have all these different commercial systems? Establish a central government, yep. I'm going to take that just a little bit further for clarity. We'd give that central government the ability to regulate interstate commerce, right? What's the problem with this? What could be scary to the colonists about doing this? I couldn't hear you. One more time. Yeah, that we'd end up just like Britain, that all of a sudden Congress would use that power to regulate interstate commerce, to do things that nobody ever imagined they would be able to do. I was on the CJA panel for a while. The CJA panel is basically, it stands for the Criminal Justice Act. What this does is that when somebody is accused of a crime at the federal level, usually the federal public defender would be able to represent them. If there's some kind of conflict of interest, they hire somebody off the CJA panel to come in and basically be a special public defender for that person. Chapter 18 of the United States Code is the criminal justice code for the United States. Every single law, with few exceptions, has as its last element such act or activity having occurred or traveled within interstate commerce. So, for example, it is illegal to try and defraud people through the mail. If you send out a letter being like, hey, if you send me $20, I have this system and I'll be able to send you back $100, and you just pocket that $20, that's fraud. It's technically called a Ponzi scheme. What makes it a crime at the federal level isn't just that you committed a crime, it's that you used an instrumentality of interstate commerce. And the reason for that is because Congress gets to regulate interstate commerce. So they make these things. Nobody thought when they said, all right, you guys can make the money, that they were going to be able to enact laws that created crimes. Yet that clause became incredibly powerful. Every situation creates a control problem. For example, if they have the ability to tax, the big question becomes, who represents whom? Who is going to be the one to say, yes, tax my people more? Next, if we regulate commerce, what limits apply? We talked about that right now. If we have the ability to execute law, then the question becomes, how is that power checked? If we create somebody whose job it is to basically go out and execute the laws, and they get to do that however they see fit, how are they going to do that? Is there something that says, here are the limits? No, you can't just rewrite this section if you don't like it. No, you can't just selectively arrest people for this, but not that. And then finally, what happens when we disagree? How are we going to adjudicate those disputes? So, the failure of the Articles of Confederation was structural. It was not simply personal. Rules made reliable national action difficult even when leaders recognized shared problems. The next question becomes significantly harder. Not for us. For us, we just get to look at what happened. But for the framers of our Constitution. How much national power is enough, and how should it be checked? Next time, we're going to start getting into the Constitution. And to set the stage for that just a little bit, the original plan with the Constitution was just to propose some amendments that would shore up the Articles of Confederation. It was just to kind of look at some of these big issues and fix them. But the takeaway here, and the most important lesson from what we've talked about with the Articles of Confederation, is that the problem was bigger than just a couple of limiting pieces. Yeah, if we give Congress the ability to tax, are we good? Does that fix a problem? Yes. But the bigger problem is that who should be subordinate to whom? If we came into this class and we all were equals, and I was trying to teach you guys, and I said, hey, everybody, please listen to me. I'd like to teach. I don't want to hear about what's happening in the world today because I want to talk about what happened 250 years ago first. That doesn't work very well. In our system, when we talk about federalism, which we're going to shortly, we needed to kind of redistribute how power was shared between the states or colonies and Congress or the national government. And I want you guys to keep this in mind because this is a real-world experiment going on. This had not been done before. Sure, there had been little revolutions and people had set up little things in the past, but this was the first time in modern history, and when I say modern, again, I mean in the last, 300, 400, 500 years, that 13 distinct groups came together to form something that would be much bigger than themselves. At the same time, for example, in Italy, you still had tons of different city-states. Italy is pretty awesome. If you decide to go there, it's a lot of fun. But you can still go to towns today that one town feels completely different from the next because they were completely isolated for, 1,000 years. There's a place called the Cinque Terre. There are 5 different cities. Each city, while you can walk between them, has a completely different feeling because they weren't united under one government. There wasn't the same thing that happens. If you are in Jefferson City, Missouri, and you go to Chicago, there's going to be slight differences. People have different values, so they have different things. Like, for example, the subway, the L, awesome. Smelly, but awesome. If you've been to Chicago, you know what I'm talking about. Here, we don't prioritize transportation as much, and so our bus system, not the best. Cleaner, but not the best. But as a whole, you can go anywhere in the United States and find a pizza. You can go anywhere in the United States and pay with $1. You can go anywhere in the United States and speak English with perhaps no exceptions, right? Maybe very few. In order to have that kind of continuity between all these very different people with all these very different beliefs, they had to change the fundamental structure of the way our government worked. And so we will continue to talk about how our Constitution and the way it's set up is designed to allow that experimentation. And I want you to walk away kind of with this idea that this is an evolution. It is continuing to go on. The Articles of Confederation did an awesome job for a first attempt. And this is going to be basically United States 2.0 that we're going to talk about next. All right. Any questions about the Articles of Confederation? I know I'm going to test on this a little bit. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about it now because I'll point out, how this improved on that as we move forward, but I don't really intend to belabor the point with this very much longer. So we probably won't have another big day on articles. All right, hearing none, let me go ahead and do the roll, and then we'll get out of here, okay? It's loading. All right, Biles. Both of you or just one? Both? Perfect. Brown. Coleman. Timothy, your last name's cut off. So Timothy, C-O. Gardner. Harper. Mariah, Hoba. Devonte, Hol.
Yeah.
Perfect. Hunter. Johnson. Jones. Moore. Jaden Nichols. Perfect. I should have just left this on so you guys can see what I'm working with here. Camry, Perd. Kamari. Sorry, I did that last time too. Qualls. Robbins. Sims. Jason Spruill. Sproul. Mashiana. Perfect. What's your first name again? Machina. I'm sorry. Again, I get like half of it sometimes. Evelyn Venikek? Avon? Yeah. Okay. Christian. WHI. Aubrey. Rain both Williamses. Rain and Robin. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and I'll see you on Wednesday.